Marcus didn't cry. That was the thing Diana couldn't stop thinking about. As the gate agent tore the ticket in half, her 9-year-old son didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't look at the agent or the torn pieces of paper falling to the floor. He looked at her, just her. The way he'd been looking at her since Michael died. Like she was the last fixed point in a world that kept moving without asking permission. She'd saved 4 months for that ticket. First class. His first time, because his lungs needed the air quality and his project needed him at his best, and he'd worked 2 years for the chance to stand in front of people at the Smithsonian and show them what he'd built. The agent said system error. There was no system error. Diana knew that. Marcus knew that. He was 9 years old and he already knew that. She opened her mouth. She didn't know yet what she was going to say, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her son was watching, and whatever she did next, he was going to remember it. If this kind of story stays with you, share it tonight with someone who needs to hear it, and stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. That was the moment the captain walked out of the jetway. He saw Marcus's face. He stopped. Michael had been gone 5 years. Not gone like people said when they were trying to be gentle about it. Gone like the chair at the kitchen table that she'd moved to the garage 6 months after because Marcus kept looking at it during dinner in a way that broke something in her chest. Gone. 5 years of figuring out how to be two people at once. She'd found out about the Smithsonian program on a Tuesday. Marcus had come home from school with a letter, not handed it to her, set it on the kitchen counter, and then gone to his room like it wasn't the most important piece of paper that had come through their door in years. She'd read it standing up. She'd had to read it twice. Dear Marcus Cole, we are pleased to inform you that your project, Turbulence and Balance, how aircraft maintain stability in unstable conditions, has been selected for presentation at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Young Innovators Showcase. She'd gone to his room. He was at his desk doing homework. Marcus, she'd said. I know, he'd said, without turning around. You know, I've been working toward it for 2 years, he'd said. I thought it would happen. She'd looked at the back of his head. At 9 years old, sitting at his desk, like he'd simply confirmed something he'd already calculated. Michael used to do that. Expect things he'd worked for. Not arrogance, faith. The specific quiet faith of someone who believed that effort and outcome were connected and acted accordingly. She'd stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she'd said, I'm proud of you. I know, he'd said. She'd gone back to the kitchen. She'd stood at the counter with the letter, and she'd let herself cry. Quietly. The practiced quiet of a woman who had learned to feel things in the spaces between her son's attention. And then she'd stopped and she'd started planning. The ticket had taken 4 months. Not 4 months of saving aggressively, 4 months of small adjustments. The coffee she made at home instead of buying. The streaming service she paused. The birthday dinner with her sister, she'd moved to her apartment instead of a restaurant. Small things, adding up. She hadn't told Marcus she was buying first class. She'd just done it. Not because she needed to impress him. Because his asthma had been worse this fall. Because the doctor had said cabin air quality mattered on longer flights. Because she had a note in her bag that said so in medical language that she'd hoped she wouldn't need. She'd printed the note anyway. She always printed the note. Marcus had been quiet on the drive to O'Hare. Not unusual. He was a quiet kid in the mornings, needed time to move from sleep to the world. She'd learned not to fill his silences. Michael had been the same way. The two of them could sit in a car for 40 minutes without speaking, and it had never felt like distance. It had felt like comfort. She'd glanced at him at a red light. He was looking out the window at the city moving past. His backpack in his lap, the same backpack he'd had since 2nd grade, dark blue, a small patch on the strap that said future engineer that his grandmother had ironed on and that Marcus had never asked to remove. Inside the backpack. 2 years of work, calculations, diagrams. A 3-minute presentation he'd rehearsed 40 times in the living room while she'd sat on the couch and asked him questions she didn't understand so he'd learn to answer questions he hadn't anticipated. She'd asked him the same question 11 times one evening. He'd answered it 11 different ways. On the 11th, he'd finally looked at her and said, "That one." "That what?" she'd said. "That's the right answer," he'd said. "I didn't know what it was until you asked me enough times." She'd thought about Michael, about the way he used to say, "Diana, you ask the questions I don't know I need." She'd thought about it and not said anything. Some things you just held. At the gate, she'd handed Marcus his ticket. He'd looked at it. He'd looked at her. "First class?" he'd said. "You've worked 2 years for this," she'd said. "You should arrive right." He'd looked at the ticket again. He hadn't said thank you. Marcus didn't say thank you for big things. He said thank you for small things, like when she remembered to buy the specific granola bar he liked, or when she turned off his light after he'd fallen asleep reading. For big things, he went quiet in a different way, the way he was quiet now. She understood it. It was the same quiet Michael went into when something mattered too much for words. She'd zipped her bag. She'd straightened his collar. He always let her, even at 9, in the way of a child who understood that some gestures weren't about the collar. "Ready?" she'd said. "Yes," he'd said. They'd walked to the gate. The gate agent's name was Sandra. Diana noticed the name tag the way she noticed everything, out of habit, out of the specific vigilance of a woman who had learned that knowing names was a small form of power in situations where power was unevenly distributed. Sandra had looked at the tickets. She'd looked at Marcus. She'd looked at the tickets again. That second look. Diana had seen that second look before. She'd felt her shoulders do the thing they did, not tensing, settling, the way a person settled when they recognized a situation and needed to be steady for what came next. "I'm sorry," Sandra had said. "There seems to have been a system error. This seat has been double booked." Diana had waited. "We can rebook you in Economy Plus," Sandra had said. "It's a very comfortable. Can you show me the system error documentation?" Diana had said. Sandra had looked at her screen. "I'd also like the name of the passenger who's been assigned Marcus's seat," Diana had said. Sandra hadn't answered that. Diana hadn't expected her to. She'd looked at Marcus. He was looking at the torn stub of his ticket. Sandra had pulled it from the printer. Something had happened with the handling. And then he'd looked up at Diana. He hadn't cried. He hadn't looked at Sandra. He'd looked at Diana, like she was the last fixed point in a world that kept moving. She'd thought, he's watching. She'd thought, he's going to remember this. She'd thought, then let him remember this right. She turned back to Sandra. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she said. "And while we wait, can you explain to me and my son exactly which FAA regulation or airline policy requires a ticketed first-class passenger to move to economy?" Sandra had picked up the phone. Marcus had said nothing. He was still watching. The supervisor's name was Kevin. He arrived at the gate with the specific, managed pace of someone who had been called to handle a situation and had developed over years of being called to handle situations a method for them. Approach with calm. Speak in policy language. Offer a solution that sounds like a courtesy. Diana had seen this before, not at airports specifically, everywhere. The specific institutional choreography of a system responding to friction by offering a slightly different version of the same no. Kevin looked at the tickets. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Diana. "Miss Cole," he said, "I understand there's been some confusion." "There's no confusion," Diana said. "My son has a valid first-class ticket. I'd like to understand the specific policy basis for asking him to move." Kevin looked at his screen. Marcus looked at Kevin. He was doing the thing he did, the quiet, systematic observation of someone cataloging information. Diana had watched him do it his whole life. At the grocery store when the self-checkout machine froze. At the doctor's office when the nurse mispronounced his name 3 times. At school when a teacher had told him his project idea was too ambitious. He never reacted in the moment. He stored. She didn't always know what he did with what he stored. She suspected he was still deciding. "The seat," Kevin said carefully, "was flagged in the system as, which system?" Diana said. Kevin looked at her. "Our reservation management." "Can you show me the flag?" she said. He looked at his screen. He typed something. He looked at the screen for a moment too long. Diana watched him look at the screen for a moment too long and understood exactly what that meant. There was no flag. There had never been a flag. There was a woman and her son who looked the way they looked, and a gate agent who had made a decision, and a supervisor who had been called to defend a decision he hadn't made and now couldn't find the documentation for. She'd been here before. Different rooms, different uniforms. Same, Kevin, she said. He looked at her. I have a doctor's note, she said, in my bag. It explains that my son has asthma and that his pulmonologist recommends first-class cabin conditions on flights over 2 hours for respiratory reasons. She paused. This flight is 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'd like to board my son in the seat I purchased for him. And if there's a legitimate policy reason that prevents that, I'd like it in writing. Kevin looked at the screen. He looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the gate door. Marcus looked at his mother. He was very still. The kind of still that wasn't passive. The active, deliberate stillness of someone who had decided that stillness was the right response to this moment and was executing that decision with full intention. Diana had seen that stillness before. In Michael. The night they'd gotten the call that his deployment was being extended, and he'd sat at the kitchen table and gone completely still for 4 minutes before he'd looked at her and said, "Okay, tell me what you need." Not from his own needs, from hers. Marcus did that. He was 9 and he did that. Kevin made a call. He stepped away from the desk, not far 3 feet, the performative distance of someone having a private conversation in a public space. Diana didn't try to hear it. She looked at Marcus. "You okay?" she said quietly. He thought about it. Not the automatic yes of a child who didn't want to worry their parent. The real consideration of someone who had been asked a genuine question and was giving it a genuine answer. "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" she said. He looked at the gate door. "About why," he said. She looked at him. "Why what?" she said. "Why the ticket wasn't enough," he said. "I've been thinking about what the difference is between us and the reason the ticket wasn't enough." He said it the way he said everything. Plainly. Without performance. The way Michael said things when he was working something out and didn't have the answer yet, but was committed to finding it. Diana looked at her son. At 9 years old, standing in an airport, with his backpack and his project, and 2 years of work, and a ticket that should have been sufficient, and wasn't. She wanted to explain it to him. She'd been preparing to explain it to him. Not today, she hadn't planned today, but she'd known the day was coming. She'd thought about what she'd say, how she'd frame it, how she'd tell him the truth about the world without making him afraid of it. She hadn't found the right words yet. She was still looking. "It's complicated," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said, "but you know the answer." "Yes," she said, "I do." "Can you tell me later?" he said. "When we're on the plane." She looked at him, at the assumption in that sentence. When we're on the plane. Not if. When. He hadn't stopped believing they were getting on the plane. She wasn't going to be the one to make him stop. "Yes," she said. "I'll tell you on the plane." He nodded. He adjusted his backpack. He went back to watching Kevin. Kevin came back to the desk. He looked like a man who had made a phone call that had not gone the way he'd hoped. "Miss Cole," he said. "I apologize for the delay." Diana waited. "Your seats are confirmed," he said. "We're sorry for the inconvenience." He said it with the specific, careful neutrality of someone reading from a script they hadn't written. Diana looked at him. She didn't say thank you, not out of coldness, because thank you would have implied that what just happened was a favor. It wasn't a favor. It was what should have happened from the beginning. "We'll board now." She took Marcus's hand, not because he needed her to. He was 9. He didn't need his hand held at a gate. She took it because she wanted to. Because he was her son. And they were about to walk through a door that had tried to stay closed, and they were going to walk through it together. He let her. He always let her. They walked toward the gate door. Marcus looked back once, not at Sandra, not at Kevin, at the gate area, at the other passengers watching, at the specific, silent audience of people who had witnessed something and hadn't done anything and were now watching the resolution. He looked at them for 1 second. Then he turned back to the door. He didn't say anything. He filed it. Diana saw him file it. She didn't know yet what he'd do with it. She would find out in Washington. They were almost through the door when she heard it. A voice behind them. Not Kevin, not Sandra. A different voice. Deeper. Calm the way calm was when it came from authority rather than management. "Hold on," the voice said. She turned. A man in a captain's uniform was standing at the gate. He wasn't looking at Kevin. He wasn't looking at Diana. He was looking at Marcus. At Marcus's backpack. At the patch on the strap that said future engineer. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus's face. Something happened in his expression that Diana didn't have a name for yet. "Is that your project?" he said to Marcus. "In the bag." Marcus looked at him. "Yes," Marcus said. "What's it about?" The captain said. Marcus looked at his mother. She nodded. Marcus looked at the captain. "Turbulence," Marcus said. "How things stay balanced when everything around them is unstable." The captain was quiet for a moment. He looked at the patch again. He looked at Marcus. "I've been flying for 20 years, he said. "I'd like to hear about that." He'd been having a bad morning before any of this. Not bad like something had gone wrong. Bad like the specific, low-level bad of a man who had woken up at 4:15 and couldn't go back to sleep and had lain there in the dark doing the thing he'd been doing too much of lately. Running numbers that didn't add up to anything good. Custody hearing was Thursday. 7 days. His lawyer had called yesterday. "James, I need you to understand that the schedule we're proposing, the alternating weeks, the holidays split down the middle, it's standard. But standard isn't guaranteed. You need to be present. You need to show up." He'd said, "I always show up." His lawyer had been quiet for a moment. "At work," she'd said. "You always show up at work." He'd hung up. He'd sat in his car in his driveway for 11 minutes. Then he'd driven to O'Hare. David was 9. Same age as the boy at the gate. He'd noticed that immediately, not the situation first, the age, the backpack. The way the kid was standing with his weight slightly forward, the posture of someone paying close attention to something they didn't fully understand yet, but intended to. David stood like that. At soccer games, when he was trying to figure out a play. At the science fair last spring when he'd been watching another kid's project and cataloging it before deciding what he thought. James had watched David do that from across the gymnasium. He hadn't gone over. He'd been on the phone with his lawyer. He'd watched his son catalog the world from 30 feet away, and he'd stayed on the phone. That was the thing his lawyer was talking about. Not the flying, not the hours, not the schedule that kept him in different cities on different days. The phone, the 30 feet, the distance he created without knowing he was creating it. He'd come out of the jetway to check the updated weather report with Sandra at the desk. He'd heard the situation before he'd seen it. Not the words, the tone. The specific, controlled tension of a woman who was not going to let something go, and a system that was counting on her to eventually let it go. He'd stepped out. He'd seen Diana. He'd seen Marcus. He'd seen Marcus's face, and that was where he'd stopped, not because of the situation, because of the expression. Marcus was watching his mother the way David watched him, with the focused, total attention of a child for whom one parent was the primary map of the world. The person whose reactions told you what things meant, whose stillness or movement told you whether to be afraid or calm, whose choices became the template for your own before you knew that's what was happening. James knew that look. He'd been on the receiving end of it every other weekend and every Wednesday evening and the 14 days at Christmas, and he'd been, what? Present in body. Somewhere else in mind. On the phone. Running through schedules. Thinking about the next flight and the one after, and the deposition and the settlement terms, and all the architecture of a life coming apart that required constant maintenance. While David watched him with the map-making expression. Filing things, deciding what the world was. James had been one of the things David was deciding about. He hadn't fully understood that until right now. Standing at a gate in O'Hare, watching a stranger's son watch his mother stand her ground. Diana had handled it. He'd watched her handle it. The documentation request, the policy question, the calm that wasn't passive, the specific dignified pressure of someone who knew exactly what was happening and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She hadn't needed him. He understood that. He hadn't stepped in to help with the situation. He'd stepped in because of the backpack, the patch. Future engineer. David had a patch like that. On his jacket, not his backpack. A NASA logo that James had bought him at the Kennedy Space Center 2 years ago on a layover. He'd taken David along, one of the rare times the schedule had aligned. And David had walked through that museum with the same forward weight posture as the boy at the gate and had stopped in front of a Mercury capsule for 6 full minutes without saying anything. James had stood beside him. He hadn't been on the phone. That was one of the days he'd been fully there. David still talked about it. James knew because his ex-wife had told him not to make him feel good, just as information. He talks about the Kennedy trip all the time, to everyone. One day, out of how many, he thought about that ratio. He thought about it standing at the gate, looking at a patch on a 9-year-old's backpack and understanding something about ratios that his lawyer hadn't been able to make him understand in 11 months of custody proceedings. It wasn't about the schedule. It was about the days you were actually there and what you did on them. Turbulence, the boy had said. How things stay balanced when everything around them is unstable. James had looked at him. He'd heard the words and understood them the way you understood things that landed in more than one place at once. How things stayed balanced when everything around them was unstable. He'd been a pilot for 20 years. He understood turbulence technically, the atmospheric pressure differentials, the aircraft response systems, the specific adjustments you made when the air stopped cooperating. He'd been in turbulence that scared him. Not many times, twice. Once over the Pacific, once approaching Denver in conditions that had made his first officer go pale. Both times he'd known exactly what to do, because he'd trained for it. Because he'd logged the hours. Because knowing what to do in turbulence wasn't something that happened in the moment, it was something built over years of showing up and paying attention and being present in the cockpit instead of somewhere else. He hadn't applied that logic to his life outside the cockpit. He was starting to. I'd like to hear about that, he'd said. Marcus had looked at his mother. She'd looked at James. The look of a woman assessing someone quickly and accurately. Not with suspicion, with the practical intelligence of a person who had learned to read situations fast. She'd nodded. Marcus had looked at James. It's about how aircraft use multiple systems at once, Marcus said. Not just one, because if you only have one system and it fails, you fail. But if you have 4 systems that each do part of the job, and one fails, the others compensate. He said it the way he'd rehearsed it. Clean, direct, no filler. Redundancy, James said, Marcus said, but not just redundancy. Communication between the systems. They don't just back each other up, they talk to each other. Constantly. And that's what keeps the plane level. James looked at him. At 9 years old, explaining aircraft stability systems at a gate in O'Hare with a backpack on his back and a project that had almost not made it onto a plane. How did you learn about this? James said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. My dad flew, he said. He told me once that a plane never flies alone, even when it looks like it does. James was very still. He said there are always systems underneath, Marcus said. You just can't see them from the ground. Diana was looking at her son. The expression on her face was not something James could name. Something between grief and pride and the specific private recognition of a parent hearing their child say something that came from somewhere the parent couldn't fully reach. James understood it, not from his own grief. From the Kennedy Space Center. From David standing in front of a Mercury capsule for 6 minutes. From all the things children carried from their parents that the parents never knew had landed. Your dad was right, James said. Marcus looked at him. I know, Marcus said, not with sadness, with the settled certainty of someone who had decided something and wasn't going back on it. James looked at Diana. She was looking at him now, not assessing anymore. Something different. The look of someone who had just heard a stranger say something true about a person they loved and wasn't sure yet what to do with it. I'm James Whitfield, he said. I'm the captain on your flight. She nodded. Diana Cole, she said. This is Marcus. I know, he said. I heard. He looked at them both. At a mother and son standing at a gate that had tried to keep them out. He thought about David, about Thursday, uh, about what his lawyer had said. You need to show up. Come on, he said. Let me walk you on. He walked them on himself. Not through the regular boarding line, through the jetway, the three of them, James slightly ahead with his hand on the door. Sandra watched them go. Kevin watched them go. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything to say. The jetway was quiet. That specific, in-between quiet of a space that existed purely to connect two places. Not a destination, not a starting point. Just the corridor between them. Marcus walked beside James. Diana walked on Marcus's other side. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Marcus said, "How long does it take to become a captain?" James looked down at him. "Depends," he said. "How much you want it?" Marcus considered that. "My dad wanted to fly his whole life," he said, "since he was 7. How old are you?" James said. 9, Marcus said. "Then you're behind," James said. Marcus looked at him. James looked a joke, James said. Marcus almost smiled. "I know," he said. "I was deciding if it was funny." "Was it? A little?" Marcus said. Diana was watching them, not intervening, watching. The specific practiced observation of a mother who had learned when to step in and when to let a thing develop on its own. At the end of the jetway, James stopped at the aircraft door. His first officer, Daniel, 34, 4 years with the airline, was doing a final check of the forward galley. He looked up when James came through. He looked at Diana and Marcus. He looked at James. "Everything okay?" Daniel said. "Everything's fine," James said. "Gate situation. Handled." Daniel nodded. He went back to his checklist. James turned to Diana. "Your seats are 2A and 2B, he said. Window and middle. If Marcus wants the window, he always wants the window," Diana said. "I would too," James said. He looked at Marcus. "First time in first class?" he said. "First time on a plane," Marcus said. James looked at him. "First time," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "And you spent it at the gate arguing with an airline," James said. "My mom spent it arguing," Marcus said. "I watched." James looked at Diana. She looked back with the expression of someone who had just had something said about them that was both accurate and more than they expected from a 9-year-old. "What did you learn?" James said to Marcus. Marcus thought about it, not quickly, the real consideration. "That you have to know the rules," Marcus said. "Better than the people enforcing them." James looked at him. "Where'd you get that?" he said. Marcus looked at his mother. "She didn't say it," he said. "She showed it." The jetway was quiet again. Diana was looking at her son with the expression from the gate. The one James hadn't been able to name. He was starting to be able to name it now. It was the expression of a parent realizing their child had seen something they'd hoped to show them without knowing they were showing it. "Go find your seat," James said. "I have a cockpit to get back to." Marcus nodded. He started down the aisle. 3 steps in, he stopped. He turned around. "Captain Whitfield," he said. "Yeah," James said. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for asking about the project. Not thank you for fixing the gate situation. Not thank you for walking us on, for asking about the project." James stood there for a second. "I want to hear the rest of it," he said. After we land, Marcus looked at him. "Okay," he said. He turned back down the aisle. Diana stayed at the door for a moment. James expected her to say something about the gate, about Sandra, about the ticket. She didn't. "He's been working on that project for 2 years," she said. "Michael, his father, he started it with him before he died." James was still. "Marcus finished it alone," she said. 8 months of work after Michael was gone. He never once said it was too hard." She looked down the aisle at her son settling into 2A. "He just kept going." She looked at James. "I don't know what you heard at the gate," she said, "or why you came out. But thank you for asking him about it. Not about what happened. About what he built." James looked at her. He thought about all the things he could say. About David. About Thursday. About what it meant to be in the right place and the wrong place at the same time. He didn't say any of it. "He's going to do great in Washington," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "he is." She walked down the aisle. James stood at the door for a moment. He thought about Michael Cole. Not a specific Michael. Diana's Michael. A man he'd never met who had started an aircraft stability project with his son and then left before they finished it, who had told his boy that a plane never flew alone, who had passed something on before he knew he was passing it on. James thought about David, about what he was passing on, about what David was filing away on the Wednesday evenings and the alternating weekends and the 14 days at Christmas, about the ratio. One day at Kennedy Space Center, out of how many, he went back to the cockpit. He sat down. He looked at the checklist. Daniel was at item 12. Ready? Daniel said. James looked at the checklist. He thought about Marcus. You have to know the rules better than the people enforcing them. 9 years old. Standing in a jetway. Saying something his mother had showed him without knowing she was showing it. James thought about what he was showing David. What David was storing. What David would say about him someday to someone who asked. James? Daniel said. James said. Reddy picked up the checklist. He started at item 1. Marcus had the window. Of course he had the window. He'd pressed his face close to the glass before they'd even finished boarding. Not with the frantic excitement of a child encountering something new, with the focused, systematic attention of someone who had been thinking about this moment for a long time and was now collecting data. Diana watched him from 2B. He wasn't looking at the terminal, he was looking at the wing. What are you seeing? She said. The flaps, he said. They're in a different position than in the diagrams. Is that a problem? No, he said. It's interesting. The diagrams show resting position. This is pre-flight position. They're not the same. He said it the way he said things he'd figured out, not with pride, with the simple satisfaction of someone whose model of the world had just been updated. She loved that about him. She didn't tell him often enough. She made a note to tell him. The cabin filled around them. Economy passengers walking through with the specific, slightly envious efficiency of people passing through somewhere they weren't staying. A few of them glanced at Diana and Marcus. She noticed. She always noticed. She'd made a decision years ago, not a dramatic decision, a quiet one, that she would notice without letting the noticing change her. She noticed now. She turned back to Marcus. He hadn't noticed. He was still looking at the wing. She thought, good. Then she thought, for now. She knew the day was coming when he would notice. She was still figuring out what she'd say. She'd promised him on the plane. She had 2 hours and 40 minutes. The flight attendant came by before pushback. Young woman. Efficient. She offered water, took their orders for after takeoff, smiled at Marcus in the way adults smiled at children who were being unusually contained. First time flying? She asked him. Yes. Marcus said without looking away from the window. Excited? He thought about it. Focused, he said. The flight attendant looked at Diana. Diana smiled. He's presenting a project at the Smithsonian, she said. Oh, the flight attendant said. She looked at Marcus with a different kind of attention. What kind of project? Aircraft stability, Marcus said, still watching the wing. Specifically how planes maintain balance in turbulence using multiple redundant systems in constant communication. The flight attendant blinked. He's 9, Diana said. I can tell, the flight attendant said. She moved on down the cabin. Marcus turned from the window. Was that weird? He said. A little, Diana said. Good weird or bad weird? Definitely good weird, she said. He turned back to the window. They pushed back at 7:52. Marcus watched the terminal pull away from them with the focused attention of someone memorizing a process. Diana watched him watch it. She thought about Michael, about the first time he'd taken her flying. Not commercial, a small Cessna, 2 years before Marcus was born, a Saturday morning when the weather was clear, and Michael had called her at 7 a.m. and said, come to the airport, I want to show you something. She'd been afraid. She hadn't told him. He'd known anyway. At 3,000 feet, he'd said, you can look down now. She'd looked down. Chicago small below them. The lake enormous. The grid of streets that she'd spent her whole life navigating reduced to something legible. Something you could understand all at once instead of piece by piece. It's different from up here, she'd said. Everything is, he'd said. That's why I fly. She'd looked at him, at the specific joy of a man doing the thing he was made to do. She'd understood something that morning about Michael that she'd carried ever since. That some people found the place where they made the most sense. And when they were in that place, they became the fullest version of themselves. And if you loved them, you made room for that place even when it scared you. She'd made room. She'd been afraid every time he flew. She'd made room anyway. They were at altitude when Marcus turned from the window. "Mom," he said. "Yeah," she said. "You said you'd tell me on the plane," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the direct, patient attention of someone who had waited for something and was now ready to receive it. She'd been thinking about it since the gate, about what to say, about how to say it, about what she wanted him to carry from this conversation. She'd been thinking about it since before the gate, really, since the day she'd realized the day was coming, and she hadn't found the words yet. She thought about Michael. He'd always known what to say to Marcus. Not because he was better with words, because he never tried to make the words do too much. He said the thing simply. He trusted Marcus to understand. She took a breath. "You know how your project is about how planes stay balanced," she said. "Yes," he said. "Multiple systems," she said. "All communicating, all compensating for each other." "Yes," he said. "People work the same way," she said. "We have systems, history, family, the way we grew up, the things we learned. And when those systems are all talking to each other, when they're all working, we balance." He was listening. "But sometimes," she said, "one of the systems looks at another system and sees something it doesn't recognize. And instead of trying to understand it, instead of letting the systems communicate, it decides the unfamiliar system doesn't belong." She paused. "That's what happened at the gate," she said. "Sandra looked at us, and her system didn't recognize us as people who belonged in first class. Not because of our ticket, because of how we looked." Marcus was quiet. "Because we're black," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at the window, at the clouds below them, at the specific white expanse of a world seen from above. "That's not logical," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." "It's a system error," he said. She looked at him. "In the actual sense," he said. "Not what Sandra said. A real system error. The system is producing the wrong output because someone put the wrong logic in." Diana looked at her son, at 9 years old, diagnosing something that most people spent their whole lives finding words for. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it is." "So how do you fix it?" he said. She thought about the gate, about not saying thank you, about knowing the rules better than the people enforcing them, about the captain who had come out and asked about the project. "Some of it," she said, "you fix by knowing the rules. Documentation, policy. The specific language that makes the system accountable to its own logic." "Like you did," he said. "Like I tried to," she said. "It worked," he said. "This time," she said. He was quiet. "What about the other part?" he said. "What other part?" "You said some of it you fixed that way," he said. "What about the rest?" She looked at him. At 9 years old, who had heard some and filed it and waited and come back for the rest. "The rest," she said. "You fix by being undeniable. By building things with your name on them. By walking into rooms and doing the work so well that the system has to update its logic." She looked at his backpack in the overhead bin. "Like your project," she said. He followed her gaze. He looked at the overhead bin. He looked at her. "Dad said that once," he said. "Not those words. But that." "What did he say?" She said. Marcus thought about it. "He said the best argument is the thing you build." She looked at the window. At the clouds. At the altitude Michael had shown her the world from on a Saturday morning in a Cessna, when she'd been afraid, and he'd known, and he'd said, "You can look down now." "Yeah," she said. "That sounds like him." They were quiet for a while. The plane moved. Below them the country arranged itself into the legible grid of something understood from a distance. Then Marcus said, "Mom." "Yeah," she said. "I'm not scared," he said, "of the system error. I want you to know that." She looked at him. "I know it exists," he said. "I've known for a while. I just didn't have the name for it." He paused. "Now I do." She looked at her son, at the clouds outside, at the altitude where things became clear. "Names matter," she said. "Yes," he said. "Dad said that too." She smiled. "He said a lot of things," she said. I remember all of them, Marcus said. She looked at him. She believed him. Daniel noticed at cruising altitude, not the flying. The flying was fine, conditions were clear, the kind of Tuesday morning over the Midwest that required presence but not intervention. Smooth air. Visibility unlimited. He noticed James. Specifically, James had been quiet since they leveled off. Not the focused quiet of a captain running through systems, the other kind. The kind that meant something was happening in the background. Daniel had flown with James for 2 years. He knew the difference. You good? Daniel said. Yeah, James said. Daniel looked at his instruments. He looked at James. The gate thing, Daniel said. What about it? James said. You walked them on yourself, Daniel said. First time I've seen you do that. James looked at the horizon. The specific, clean line of the world at 30,000 feet, further than from the ground, clearer, the kind of perspective that required altitude to find. Kid reminded me of someone, James said. Your son, Daniel said. James looked at him. You have a photo of him on your bag, Daniel said. Same backpack, different patch. James looked at his flight bag in the corner. David's face looking back at him from a photo tucked into the outer pocket. David at the Kennedy Space Center, standing in front of the Mercury capsule, the forward weight posture, the focused expression. He hadn't noticed he'd been keeping that photo there. He'd put it there 8 months ago. He hadn't moved it. Yeah, James said. My son. Daniel nodded. He went back to his instruments. James thought about the conversation in the jetway. About Marcus saying, the best argument is the thing you build. His father had said that. A man Marcus had lost at some point. James hadn't asked when, hadn't needed to. It was in the way Diana said Michael, with the specific, settled weight of a name that had moved from present tense to past. Marcus's father had told him, the best argument is the thing you build. And Marcus had built. For 2 years, through whatever the loss had been, through the specific daily difficulty of being 9 years old and missing someone and having to go to school anyway and come home to a dinner table that was configured differently than it used to be. He'd built anyway. Because that was what his father had told him. Because that was what he'd stored. James thought about what he told David. Not in a summarizing way, specifically. The actual things. The conversations he could remember clearly, versus the ones that blurred into the general texture of weekends and Wednesday evenings. The Kennedy Space Center. Look at that capsule. One person. Entire mission. Everything they needed, right there. A Saturday morning making pancakes. You don't flip until the bubbles stop. A phone call David had made to him during a layover in Phoenix. Dad, what's the biggest storm you've ever flown through? And James had told him the details, the instrument readings, what it felt like when the aircraft dropped 300 feet in 2 seconds, and David had been quiet for a moment and then said, were you scared? And James had said, yes. And I knew what to do anyway. That's the whole job. He remembered that one clearly. He remembered it because David had said, I want to know what to do when I'm scared. And James had said, then you practice. You practice until the thing you're scared of becomes the thing you know. He'd hung up feeling like a decent father. He'd been in Phoenix. He'd gone to dinner alone. He'd come home 4 days later. David had been at school. He'd unpacked. He'd gone back to his schedule. That was the ratio. One good phone call. Surrounded by distance. He picked up the intercom at the 90-minute mark. Not an announcement, an internal call to the forward galley. Rachel, the lead flight attendant, picked up. Captain, she said. The boy in 2A, James said. Marcus Cole. He's presenting a project at the Smithsonian when we land. Yes, Rachel said. He told me about it. Aircraft stability. Can you ask him if he'd like to come see the cockpit? James said. Before we start descent, if his mom's okay with it. A pause. Of course, Rachel said. And Rachel, he said. Yes? Don't make it a big thing, he said. Just ask. Diana said yes before Rachel finished asking. Marcus said, can I bring my notes? Rachel said she'd check. James said yes. Marcus came up 7 minutes later with a small notebook, spiral, blue cover, the edges worn from being opened and closed many times. He stood at the cockpit door and looked in with the forward weight posture. James turned around. Come in, he said. Marcus stepped in. He stood between the seats. He looked at the instruments. He looked at the windows. At the specific, enormous sky of 30,000 feet, not the compressed version seen from a passenger window, the full version. The horizon a clean line all the way around. The ground far below, arranged into the legible geometry of a world seen from altitude. He didn't say anything for a moment. James let him not say anything. Daniel glanced back, smiled, went back to his instruments. There are more systems than I thought, Marcus said. There always are, James said. Up close. Marcus looked at the center console, at the specific, dense arrangement of switches and displays and indicators that comprised the nervous system of the aircraft. In my project, Marcus said, I focused on four main systems: hydraulic, flight control, navigation, communication. That's a good four, James said. But there are more, Marcus said. Many more, James said. Do they all talk to each other? Marcus said. Constantly, James said. Even when nothing's happening. Especially when nothing's happening. Marcus looked at him. My dad said the flying is in the preparation, he said. Not the flight. James looked at him. Your dad was a pilot, he said. Yes, Marcus said. He was right, James said. Marcus opened his notebook. He looked at something on the page. He looked at the instruments. He made a note. James watched him make the note, the focused, unhurried handwriting of someone who had learned to write carefully because what he was writing mattered. Marcus, James said. Yes, Marcus said, still writing. The project, James said. Multiple systems in constant communication, that's not just aircraft. Marcus looked up. I know, he said. What else is it? James said. Marcus thought about it. Anything that has to stay balanced, he said. When things outside it are unstable. Like what? James said. Marcus looked at the horizon. At the clean line of the world from 30,000 feet. Families, he said. I think they work the same way. Multiple systems, all have to communicate. If one stops, the others compensate. But it's harder without it. He said it the way he said things he'd worked out. Not with performance. With the simple confidence of someone reporting a finding. James was very still. Your dad taught you that? He said. No, Marcus said. I figured it out after he was gone. He looked at James. When one system stopped, he said, I had to understand how the others worked, so we could stay balanced. James looked at the boy, at 9 years old, who had lost a system and had studied the remaining ones until he understood how to compensate, who had built a project about it, who was standing in a cockpit at 30,000 feet, explaining it to a pilot who had been thinking about his own family's systems for 90 minutes. Your dad would be proud, James said. Marcus looked at the instruments. I know, he said. I'm doing it for him. James looked at the horizon, at the clean, unobstructed line of it. He thought about David, about what David was building, about what systems David was studying, about what David would say when someone asked him, who taught you that? He wanted to be the answer. He wanted to be in the answer. He pulled out his phone, turned it over in his hand. Can I ask you something? He said to Marcus. Yes, Marcus said. Your dad, James said. What do you remember most about him? Marcus thought about it, the real consideration, the looking at the floor kind. That he showed up, Marcus said. Not for big things, for the regular things. He paused. He came to every science fair, even the bad ones, even when I didn't win. Another pause. He said the showing up was the point, not the winning. James held his phone. The showing up was the point, he said. Yes, Marcus said. James looked at the phone, at David's contact. At the time, 10:47 a.m. David was in school. He'd be in math right now. James put the phone back in his pocket. He'd call at lunch. Not about the custody hearing, not about the schedule. Just to call, just to be the person who called. Marcus, he said. Yes, Marcus said. Go back to your seat, James said. We start descent in 20 minutes. I need to focus. Okay, Marcus said. He closed his notebook. He looked at the instruments one more time. Captain Whitfield, he said. Yeah, James said. Thank you for the data, Marcus said. James looked at him. The data, he said. For the project, Marcus said. I have 3 new things I didn't have before. He held up the notebook. 3 new notes on the page. James looked at them. He couldn't read the handwriting from where he sat. He didn't need to. Good luck in Washington, he said. Thank you, Marcus said. I don't think I'll need it. No, James said. I don't think you will either. Marcus went back to his seat. James looked at the horizon. Daniel looked at him. Good kid, Daniel said. Yeah, James said. Reminded you of David, Daniel said. A little, James said. What part? James thought about it. The part that's still being decided, he said. Daniel looked at him. What does that mean? It means, James said, that there's still time to be in the answer. Daniel looked at his instruments. For what? He said. When someone asks him who taught him things, James said. I want to be in that answer. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then show up, Daniel said. Yeah, James said. For the regular things, Daniel said. James looked at him. You heard that, James said. Sound carries in here? Daniel said. James looked at the horizon. Yeah, he said. I know. They landed at 11:43. Marcus watched the runway come up to meet them with the same focused attention he'd given the wing at O'Hare. Not with relief that the flight was over, with the systematic observation of someone confirming a hypothesis. Flaps changed again, he said. Landing configuration, Diana said. I know, he said. I just wanted to say it out loud. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because Dad used to say things out loud when he figured them out, he said. He said it made them more real. She looked at the window, at the runway, at Washington arriving beneath them. He did do that, she said. I know, Marcus said. I stored it. They were off the plane by noon. Marcus walked through the jetway with his backpack adjusted precisely on both shoulders, the way he always wore it when something important was about to happen. Both straps even, the weight distributed correctly. Diana noticed. She didn't say anything. Some things you just witnessed. At the end of the jetway, a ground crew member was standing with a small sign. Marcus Cole, Smithsonian Young Innovators Showcase. Marcus stopped when he saw it. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at Diana. There's a sign, he said. Yes, she said. With my name, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at it again. Dad would have taken a photo, he said. I'm taking a photo, she said. She already had her phone out. She took it. Marcus looked at the sign one more time. Then he walked toward it. The Smithsonian was 20 minutes from the airport. In the car, Marcus was quiet. Not the processing quiet of the morning, the preparation quiet. The specific internal stillness of someone moving from thinking about a thing to doing it. Diana let him have it. She looked out the window at Washington. She thought about Michael. He should have been here. He should have been in this car looking at his son's profile. The jaw that was his, the way Marcus held his hands in his lap when he was thinking, the forward weight posture that had been Michael's first and was now Marcus's. He should have been here to see the sign with Marcus's name on it. He should have been here for a lot of things. She'd stopped finishing that sentence with anger a long time ago. She finished it now with something quieter. Something that felt less like loss and more like incompleteness. The specific, permanent incompleteness of a life that had been interrupted rather than concluded. Michael hadn't been finished. Neither had they. They were still going. That was the thing she'd decided. Not in a moment, over years, slowly, that going was the answer. Not moving on, moving forward. There was a difference. Moving on implied leaving something behind. Moving forward meant carrying it with you and going anyway. She was carrying him. Marcus was carrying him. In a project about how things stayed balanced when everything around them was unstable. The showcase was in the East Wing. 12 presenters, ages 8 to 14. Projects ranging from water filtration systems to machine learning to Marcus, aircraft stability. He'd been assigned Table 7. He set up without help. Diana offered twice. He declined twice. The third time she offered, he looked at her. Mom, he said. I know, she said. You've got it. She stepped back. She watched him arrange his materials, the diagrams, the calculations, the scale model of an aircraft stability system he'd built from scratch over 4 months using materials from the hardware store and instructions he'd found and modified and improved. He placed each thing deliberately, checked the arrangement, adjusted one diagram 2 inches to the left, checked again. Ready, he said, to himself, not to her. She heard Michael in it. The judges came through in pairs. Marcus presented to 7 pairs over 90 minutes. Diana stood at a distance, close enough to hear, but far enough to be background. She heard him present for the first time without interruption. She'd heard it 40 times in the living room. This was different. In the living room, he was practicing. Here, he was saying it. There was a quality to his voice she hadn't heard before, not louder, more settled. The specific, grounded certainty of someone who had moved from rehearsing to knowing. The key insight she heard him tell the third pair of judges is that the systems don't just back each other up. They're in constant communication. They're always sharing information. And that communication, not the redundancy itself, but the communication, is what maintains balance. One of the judges, a woman, 50s, reading glasses, the look of someone who had evaluated hundreds of these and still gave each one full attention, said, "What made you choose this topic?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "My father flew," he said. "He told me a plane never flies alone." I wanted to understand what he meant. The judge looked at him. "And do you?" she said. "Better than before," he said. "I think it takes a lifetime to fully understand." The judge wrote something down. She looked at Marcus. "How old are you?" she said. 9, he said. "You're going to be formidable at 14, she said. Marcus thought about it. "I'm going to be formidable now," he said. "I'll just also be formidable at 14. The judge looked at her colleague. Her colleague looked at Marcus. Diana put her hand over her mouth. At 2:15, a man stopped at table 7. Not a judge. She'd learned to read the badges. A visitor. 60s. The careful, interested attention of someone who wasn't browsing. He looked at Marcus's model. He looked at the diagrams. He looked at Marcus. "You built this yourself," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "All of it. The model and the calculations," Marcus said. "The theory is from existing literature. I synthesized and applied it." The man looked at the model. "The communication architecture," he said. "Between the systems, that's your original contribution?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Most stability research focuses on redundancy. I wanted to understand why redundancy alone isn't sufficient. The answer is that backup without communication is just parallel failure waiting to happen." The man was quiet for a moment. "I'm Dr. Raymond Ellis," he said. "I run the aerospace engineering program at Georgetown." Marcus looked at him. "I'm 9, Marcus said. "I know," Dr. Ellis said. "I'm introducing myself for later." He gave Marcus a card. Marcus looked at it. He looked at Diana. She nodded. He put the card in his backpack, in the front pocket where he kept things he considered important. At 4 o'clock, they announced the results. Marcus won his age category. He didn't whoop, didn't jump, didn't look at Diana with the performance of a child who had won something. He nodded. The small, specific nod of someone who had expected this and was confirming the expectation. Then he looked at Diana. And that was the moment. Not the award. Not Dr. Ellis's card. Not the judge saying formidable. The moment Marcus looked at Diana after they said his name. He wasn't looking at her the way he'd looked at her at the gate. Not for reassurance. Not for a fixed point. For sharing. The specific, quiet look of someone who had something and wanted the person they loved most to have it too. She crossed the room. She hugged him. He let her. "Dad would have said something embarrassing," he said, into her shoulder. "So embarrassing," she said. "In a loud voice," he said. "The loudest," she said. "I kind of wish he had," he said. She held on. "Me too," she said. "Me too." James called David at lunch. 12:15 Chicago time. He was still in Washington. Layover before the return flight. 3 hours in the crew lounge. The specific in-between time of a day that wasn't going anywhere until it was. He'd been thinking about the call since the cockpit. Since the showing up was the point. Since I want to be in the answer. He'd been thinking about what to say. He hadn't figured it out. He called anyway. David picked up on the 4th ring. "Dad?" The specific surprise of a child who had learned not to expect the call at this time on this day. That landed. James sat with it landing. "Hey," he said. "You at lunch?" David said. "I have 11 minutes. I won't take 11, James said. "Okay," David said. A pause. The specific, careful pause of a child who had learned that calls from dad sometimes had an agenda and was waiting to find out what the agenda was. That landed too. "No agenda," James said. "I just called." David was quiet. "Just called," he said. "Yeah," James said. Another pause. Shorter. Okay, David said. Where are you? Washington. James said. Lay over. Did you fly over the monuments? Approach from the south, James said. I can see the mall from about 4,000 feet. Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, the whole thing. What does it look like? David said. Small, James said. The way everything looks small from up there. But still, you can tell it matters. Some things you can tell even from a distance. David was quiet, processing. I want to see that, he said. I know, James said. We'll go. You said that before, David said. I know, James said. This time I mean the specific thing. Next month. I'm going to look at my schedule and find a weekend. And we're going to Washington. And I'm going to show you the mall from 4,000 feet. In a plane? David said. In a plane, James said. Your plane? A smaller one, James said. I'll arrange it. David was quiet for a moment. Dad, he said. Yeah, James said. Are you okay? David said. James looked at the ceiling of the crew lounge, at the specific institutional gray of a room that existed for people in between places. Getting there, he said. Okay, David said. Not what does that mean? Not are you sure? Just, okay. The specific trusting okay of a child who had decided that his father's word was enough. James didn't know if he'd earned that. He knew he was going to. Go eat, James said. You've got 8, David said. Go, James said. Dad, David said. Yeah, James said. Come to my science fair, David said. It's next Thursday. James was still. What time? He said. 6, David said. It's only an hour. Mom said you probably couldn't. I'll be there at 6, James said. Silence. You have a flight, David said. I'll move it, James said. You can do that? It's my schedule, James said. I build it. David was quiet. Okay, he said. The specific okay of someone who was trying not to want something too much in case it didn't happen. James heard it. He was going to be at that science fair. Not because it was a big thing, because David had asked, and because the showing up was the point. He filed the schedule change before the crew lounge coffee got cold, moved the Thursday flight to Friday morning. His chief of staff called 4 minutes later. James, she said. I know, he said. The Chicago to Denver Thursday evening. Give it to Ramirez, he said. I have something. Something, she said. My son's science fair, he said. A pause. Okay, she said. Not the careful okay of someone managing an inconvenience. The simple okay of someone who understood. Okay, she said again. I'll sort it. He thought about Diana while he waited for his return flight. About the gate. About the way she'd handled it. The documentation, the policy question, the not saying thank you after. About Marcus watching her. About Marcus filing it. About what Marcus would carry from that moment. He thought about what he'd carry. Not from the gate specifically. From the morning. From a 9-year-old in a cockpit at 30,000 feet, explaining how things stayed balanced when everything around them was unstable. From the showing up was the point. He took out his phone. He opened the Notes app. He typed, next month, Washington with David, 4,000 feet, the mall. He looked at it. He added, Thursday, science fair, 6 p.m. Don't move this. He put his phone away. He thought about Michael Cole, Diana's Michael, a man he hadn't known, a man who had started a project with his son and then left before it was finished, who had told his boy, a plane never flies alone, who had said, the best argument is the thing you build, who had shown up to every science fair, even the bad ones, even when Marcus didn't win, who had left a child who could stand in a cockpit at 30,000 feet and explain aircraft stability systems and family systems in the same breath. That was the inheritance, not the project. The way Marcus moved through the world, the forward weight posture, the things said out loud when you figured them out, the filing, the going anyway. Michael had built that, without knowing he was building it, without knowing how much time he had. James thought about David, about what he was building, about whether David would be able to stand somewhere someday and say, my dad showed up, for the regular things, even the bad science fairs, even when I didn't win. He wanted to build that. He hadn't started yet. He was starting Thursday. Diana and Marcus were at the hotel when James's return flight pushed back. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. Marcus was at the desk. He had his notebook open. He was writing. What are you adding? She said. Notes from the cockpit, he said. I didn't want to forget. You remember everything, she said. I know, he said. But Dad said writing it down makes it more real. She watched him write. At the desk in a hotel room in Washington, with his project award on the nightstand, and Dr. Ellis's card in the front pocket of his backpack, and 3 new things in his notebook from a pilot who had walked them onto a plane. She thought about the morning, about the gate, about Sandra and Kevin and the ticket and Marcus not crying, about what he'd said in the car. I stored it. She'd been thinking about that all day, about what else he'd stored, about all the things she'd done, not the big things, the regular things, the Tuesday evenings and the Saturday mornings and the times she'd been tired and done it anyway, that were living somewhere in Marcus without her knowing. The way Michael's things were living in Marcus. The forward weight posture, the saying things out loud, the faith that effort and outcome were connected. She hadn't given Marcus those things. Michael had. And Michael had given them without knowing how few mornings he had left to give them. She'd given Marcus other things. She didn't always know what. She thought about the gate, about not saying thank you, about I'd like to understand the specific policy basis, about standing still when the system expected her to move. She'd given him that. She hadn't known she was giving it. She was always giving things she didn't know she was giving. That was the thing about children. They took what you did, not what you said, what you did, and they carried it into cockpits, into Smithsonians, into the rest of their lives. You didn't get to choose which things they took. You only got to choose who you were while they were watching. Mom, Marcus said. Yeah, she said. What did you write down about today? He said. She looked at him. I haven't written anything, she said. You should, he said. So it's more real. She looked at her phone. She opened the notes app. She thought for a moment. She typed. He didn't cry. He watched. He stored it. And tonight he's at a desk in Washington, writing down 3 things from a pilot he met this morning, because his father told him writing made things more real. Michael, he's still giving him things. So are you. You just can't always see it. She read it back. She put her phone down. What did you write? Marcus said. Something for later, she said. For when? He said. She looked at him. For when I need to remember what today felt like, she said. Marcus looked at her. He looked at his notebook. He wrote something else. She didn't ask what. Some things you just witnessed. James made it to the science fair. Thursday, 6 p.m. He was standing at the door when David walked in with his project. A model of the solar system. Each planet labeled in David's handwriting. Saturn's rings made from a cut-up CD that caught the gymnasium light and threw small rainbows on the ceiling. David saw him. He stopped. You came, he said. I said I would, James said. David looked at him. The assessing look. The one James was learning to read, not suspicion, calibration. David was updating something. Mom said you had a flight, David said. I moved it, James said. David looked at his project. He looked at his father. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He handed James one end of the display board. Help me set up, he said. James took the board. They set it up together. In Washington, Diana and Marcus were at the airport for the flight home. Marcus had his backpack on both straps, weight distributed. Dr. Ellis's card in the front pocket. His notebook with 3 new things from a cockpit at 30,000 feet. His award in his carry-on, not in the checked bag, carry-on, because some things you kept close. At the gate, Diana looked at him. Ready? She said. He adjusted his left strap. Yes, he said. They walked toward the door. No one stopped them. Subscribe if you're new, share this tonight with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments. What did someone show you without knowing they were showing it? I read everyone. See you in the next story.